It's my pleasure to introduce to you Ms. Webster again and Mr. Raymond Santana, who's been kind enough to come to talk to us about all that he's gone through. Tell me if these work. If not, we've got two portable microphones. But
hello, hello.
Hi, everyone can hear me?
yeah. Okay,
Well, I really want to give Raymond the floor. He's far more interesting, and also you've already heard a little from me, but I'll just briefly say that his case, the Central Park 5 jogger case, I'm sure you all remember, and it was, incredibly life-transforming event for Raymond, I'm sure, and one of tragically many similar cases. I mentioned in the morning program that over 300 people have been exonerated through DNA evidence, and Raymond is one of them. However, 1/3 of those 305 were young people, 22 or younger at the time of their wrongful convictions. And Raymond can tell you a little bit about that. And in addition, hopefully we'll touch on the issues of false confessions in his case. The NYPD recently voluntarily adopted a new practice, which is to record the entire interrogation from start to finish in every felony case. So what that means is, rather than in Raymond's case where you have, the tape is turning on and off and you have no idea as a juror whether or not you are really seeing what transpired. There could be, harassment, coercion, and various other things going on that the jurors would never know about. I believe in Raymond's case it was really only the confession part that was video recorded. So now we can say this will not happen again, at least not in New York City, we hope. The racial profiling is definitely still going on and is something that is very hard to legislate against. But hopefully, this kind of situation in which you have 5 young men without attorneys present, falsely confessing to a case, and the jury has no idea what actually transpired during the interrogation. Hopefully, we could say that will not happen quite that way again. So I'd just like to turn it over to Raymond and kind of ask him first if you could speak about being a young man in New York City at that time and the events that led up to your arrest that night.
First off, I want to thank everybody for having me. It's an honor to be here today. Can you hear me clearly? It's good? I was 14 years old back in 1989, and my life as a 14-year-old, just going to school, trying to get into some fashion, trying to find my way in the world. Sometimes it's difficult for people to understand why would somebody confess to a crime they did not commit. And for us, we were 14. We never had any runners with the system. We were very naive. Of that group, we were the most naive. And for me, that day consists of going to school and coming home, and we had a holiday, so we didn't have school the next day. I usually had a curfew, but if I didn't have school, I could stay out a little bit later. And that's what led me to hang out with older guys, be with a group. Also 14, you're basically a follower. If you get around the kids that's 15, about to be 16, you're a follower. And so that was another reason how we wound up in the park. But it was, for me, 14 years, just look at the life of a 14-year-old kid. It doesn't have that much going on. He's just basically trying to find his way.
So can you tell me about what happened during the interrogation?
We got picked up for misdemeanor charges, which was like rioting, trespassing. We didn't get charged with assaults and stuff like that. We got charged with misdemeanor charges. And so, we were waiting for our parents to come. and some of our parents took long. And in the process of that, these two workers found Miss Millie in the park, and she had lost so much blood, and they thought she wasn't going to make it. And so what happened was they called the homicide detectives who came in, and so that's how the process started with the interrogation. Now, another question I get a lot is, what makes people confess? And so, I gave you, being 14, being naive, not being involved in the system. And then when you get into those interrogations, you're really scared. I always ask people, if you get stopped by a police officer, either you become very afraid or you become very angry. And that's just based on your experience. And so for us 14, we were already at a disadvantage because we were very afraid. And so, interrogations start very calm. They start, Raymond, we just want to know what happened that night. And so you tell them what happened, what you see happen, and that's not the story they're looking for. Because they're doing an investigation, they know that a woman was found in a bloody ravine, they know that she was raped. And so, and they know other things happened that night. And so they're trying to fit these pieces in as the day goes along. And so we were in interrogation for 15 to 30 hours as 14-year-old kids. And so what happens, it starts off, very calm. And as they're not getting the answers they're looking for, of what they think are the facts, they start to become more aggressive. And, when you have a kid in there for 15 hours, that becoming aggressive takes stages. But you have all the time in the world to do it. And it gets to a point, like for me, where police officers start to lunge at you, they start to spit in your face, while they're talking to you, they yell at you, they curse at you, they say all these derogatory terms to you. And I had my grandmother there at the time, but my grandmother, she couldn't speak English well. She couldn't carry a conversation, and they knew that, and so they played on that. So they had an officer who would come in, and he knew how to speak Spanish very well, and he would ask her to come on out into the hallway. She's in the hallway, and he's basically telling her, look, Raymond's not giving us all the information, we need your help. And while she's in the hallway, they have about 3 or 4 officers yelling at me. And so, when she returns, I'm crying. She doesn't understand what's going on. And also, you gotta realize she didn't go very far in education. She never been involved with the law. So she didn't know to say, stop, let me get a lawyer. She didn't know any of that. When you're dealing with authority figures, our first thing is to cooperate. What is it that you want? What is it that you need? And they understand this. And so, that happened for several hours. And the last point for me was, whereas, they had a Detective Arroyo who was the lead investigator in my case, and he gets upset and he slams down on the table and starts yelling at me. He's basically telling me, like, look, you're gonna give me what I want to know, and he makes this lunge at me like he's about to physically, put his hands on me. And out of nowhere, this other detective comes out and he stops him. And when he stops him, right then and there, I was grateful because I felt like he saved my life. And he kicks everybody out of the room, tells all of them, get out, everybody leave. And he sits down and he says, Raymond, look, I need your help. I know you're a good kid, I know you didn't do these things, but I need your help. And I'm sitting there saying, well, what do you want? I don't know what to say, like, I don't know what's going on. And he pulled out this picture of Kevin Richardson. Now, Kevin Richardson, I didn't know him at the time. He had got arrested that night along with me, but I didn't know Kevin Richardson. Kevin Richardson lived in the Schaumburg houses. I didn't. I lived more on the east side of Spanish Harlem. And he pulled out this picture of Kevin Richardson and he placed it on the table. And he says, do you know him? And I say, no. He says, that's Kevin. Now, you see that scratch under his eye? Kevin had a scratch under his eye from when he was running from the police and they tackled. And so he says, that scratch came from the woman. We know he did it. He's going to jail, but I don't want you to go to jail. So I need your help. I need you to give me something on him. And right then and there, at my breaking point, 14-year-old kid, not knowing what to do, no advice, I decided to make him a story. And that's how it starts. And so once I made it, once I say Kevin did it, well, what did Kevin do? Kevin raped the woman. Well, where? What happened? You gotta give me more. And this is how the story starts to formulate. And so I didn't know Antron McCrae. I didn't know Stephen Lopez. These are the 3 guys that wound up in my statement. I didn't know Yusuf Salam. I never met Corey Wise. But they didn't wind up on statement. It was just Steve, Antron, and Kevin, because these are the names that Detective Hardigan gave me. And so, as the statement goes along, he says, well, we know that she lost a lot of her blood, and she was found where, you know, all these injuries. Something had to be used. What was used? A rock, a brick, something. And I said, oh, well, brick was used. Well, how was the brick used? Stephen Lopez used the brick. Okay, and he writes it down. I never wrote anything down. And this is how the confession came to form and be what you see, you know, now.
Wow, I think that's a perfect explanation. I think of how it often happens is that, you know, in 25% of the cases we see a false confession involved in the wrongful conviction, and oftentimes I think it is just that kind of perfect storm of a suspect who's held for a very long time, who doesn't understand the legal system, who doesn't realize that they can be lied to. You know, and whenever I go speak to kids in high schools and middle schools, I always, you know, make sure that I express that you should know that, you know, police officers can lie to you in the course of an interrogation. They make up evidence that doesn't exist. And, you know, as in this case with the scratch on Kevin Richardson. And then also that, you know, Raymond is sort of appearing here to know non-public details of the case, and that he's talking about this brick is being used. Well, how did he find out about the brick? He found out because the detective fed him that information. So I mean, I think it's interesting that, believe it or not, you know, we have had police officers tell us they had no idea that they were feeding suspects this information. It could be, you know, just from showing photos of the victim, or, you know, casually, you know, in conversation about the crime, things leak out. Or, you know, I'm not sure, Raymond, I guess this leads me to my next question for you. Did you feel that the detectives knew they were setting you up? Can you answer this question? He still has an ongoing.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I think also that, you know, that's kind of tricky. I think because when I look back at it, I don't think they had all the facts yet. I just think they found a woman that was raped and she was left for dead in the park, and they was trying to piece it together. But because at that same time you had Elizabeth Lederer and Linda Fairstein, who was acting as lead investigators. So this is the stuff that they was feeding to the officers, and they were questioning us. So I mean, you know, the part where he's, you know, where he's basically telling me that I can go home, he can help me if I help him, I think that's wrong. You know, but I think that, you know, I think that they didn't have all the facts, and I think that's what helped us out, because we didn't know the location of the jogger, we didn't know what clothes she had on, you know, who went first, who went second, who went third was all wrong. The time itself, you know, was wrong, it was off. The location had us placed, we was 400 yards away from the location. So all that stuff was fed. You know, there wasn't a brick actually used. We know that Mateus Reyes used a tree branch. And so all that stuff that, you know, they fed to us was basically wrong, which we thought later on people would figure it out, especially when the DNA evidence comes back, because now, you know, they took handprints, they took footprints, they took our clothes, they took hair samples, they took blood samples, they took everything, and nothing came back to match, because they did have a sample from the crime scene. They had 2 samples, and they knew that it came from one perpetrator, not from the 5 of us. And so that's where the problem, that's where for me is where the conflict comes in, because once the DNA evidence comes back and it doesn't match, then you should entertain an alternative theory. So, you know, something went wrong here. And they knew who that something was, because Mateus Reyes committed a rape 2 days before on April 17th in the park. And they was looking for him because of the fresh stitches on his chin. That's how the victim ID'd him. And so they had his name and they was looking for him. And they wound up apprehending him a couple of months later. And so, you know, around the same time that the DNA evidence came back and it didn't match, they knew that he was the alternative theory, the motive, and they didn't entertain it. They closed that case instead, and that case was closed within 6 weeks, and he never got charged with it, because the story that, you know, I'm pretty sure everybody here read it. It sounded more entertaining. You know, 5 Black and Latino youths running wild in Central Park, raping white women. And so, and that was the story they stuck with.
Yeah, just the fact that there was even DNA testing before trial that excluded each of them and that they were still convicted is, you know, really, really hard to understand how, you know, that could happen. And I don't have any light to really shed on that except to add that we had 2 cases come out of Chicago recently that were very similar. Just so you know, this is sort of not just a New York City problem. There were 2 cases. One was the Dixmoor case, it was called, and one was the Englewood case. You can learn more on our website, but basically it's very, very similar cases where you have 5 young men of color, and each one of those 2, sorry, so 10 total, wrongfully convicted for crimes that one, you know, adult male committed. Because of, you know, the exact same situation of false confessions, interrogations that, you know, were not conducted properly and resulted in wrongful convictions. DNA testing done at the time that showed none of them were involved, and they were convicted anyway. So now this is a total of, you know, 14 young people across the country in the 90s. So, you know, it's sort of like this wave of this sort of like wilding theory of these wolf packs of, you know, young men of color is just so obviously racially charged. So I guess I'd like to ask you a little bit about that. I mean, when you were 14 years old, you know, I'm not sure how aware you were, but maybe, you know, today, I mean, how do you see race as a factor in this case?
You know, I look at it from a media standpoint, you know, a race issue, because the story just sounded so enticing to people. We tend, as a people, we tend to be interested in bad stuff. And so this story, you know, fed right up the alleyway where people became so interested. You know, also the media, you have the, you know, your 4 major papers, they were fighting for you know, they would call it the tabloid wars, and they were fighting, you know, to see who can sell the most papers. And so they created some of the most vicious headlines. And so for me, at that point, from the media, it became more of a race issue. You know, when you look at the prosecutor and you look at the police, I think it has, you know, racial undertones, but it was more about, you know, the pressure, getting it done quickly, because, you know, we knew that New York City back then was in a financial crisis. You know, we was looking at going bankrupt, and people didn't believe in the police system anymore. You know, you had the Bernard Getz case back then where the vigilante took matters into his own hands, and people looked at that as a sign of this is where we're heading. And so it was a lot of agencies that had something to prove, and the police department was one. And this was a case that it screamed, you know, it needs to be closed instantly. Like, what's going on? Like, you know, people ready to turn on the police force. And so for me, it became about people just doing their jobs. Once the DNA evidence came back and they didn't entertain the other theories, everybody failed. The prosecutors failed to do their job. Police failed because nobody went back and looked at, you know, the evidence. The media failed because, you know, they wrote articles and said that the DNA evidence didn't match, but they also said there's a 6th person out there somewhere and we didn't find them yet. And then that was another thing too, because how could you have a 6th person still running around but we're still being charged? It makes no sense. And the public bought it because the public was so involved emotionally. You know, this was the taking back of our city. You know, you had all these reports about the super predators, which were the kids. You know, this is what our kids are doing now. You know, the wilding, the term of the wilding. And, you know, also with the Englewood case, and all these became examples, you know, that said, look, we got to do something about these kids. And people were just so emotionally wrapped up, you know, that they bought it hook, line, and sinker. You know, and so now when you have a whole system who's in cahoots, you know, we didn't stand a chance, you know, and this is the reason why we went to trial, we lost, and we received 5 to 10 year terms. You know, because at that point, everybody turned their back.
Yeah, should we just open it up for questions now? Yeah.
Well, this is a discussion, right? Let's go
Yeah.
ahead.
Was the woman dead? The woman who was raped? She died?
No, she did not.
She did not.
She you know, she suffered a brain injury and she made a miraculous recovery. And she writes about that. She has a book now that talks about her recovery and how she came back from this dramatic brain injury.
And was this in Central Park?
Yes. Yes.
So she survived.
Yes, she survived.
Thank you. And you were in prison for how long?
I was in prison for 7 years.
Was that where you lived? Rikers Island?
That was upstate New York. When I was a juvenile. I was sentenced to 5 to 10 years as a juvenile. And I served almost 7 years.
From when you were how old?
I was 14 years old.
14 till you were like 21?
So I was 21.
I guess I just felt we should clarify that although she survived, she had no memory of the event. Right.
Yeah.
So she has not been a witness or anything
Yeah.
to this. Yes, there's one.
You know, I just remember, thanks, Dan. I just remember seeing all the headlines in the papers and having this feeling of, I'm so glad they got them. And boy, that just takes me to a deeper place right now. The question I want to ask is, actually do you believe that the police believed you guys, you kids, had done it, or that they were making it up? And if the answer is they were making it up, then what troubles me most of all is the kind of corrupt nature of the police, because whoever did do it was still out there to do it again.
That's right. You know, I believe it's both. I believe that they knew we was making up the stories, you know, because they knew exactly the location that Patricia Miley was found. Now, we said the rape happened by the reservoir. They knew that was false. That was 400 yards distance. So they knew we were lying. You know, they knew what she had on. You know, we all gave the wrong description. They knew that she was bound and gagged. This is the way that Mateus Reyes bound and gagged all his victims. None of us described that. So they knew that we were telling a lie. But what happens is that they became so invested into that lie that they started to believe it. And to this day, they still won't let it go. They have testified at trial, pre-trial. They're doing depositions now, and they all get on the stand, and they all say they did a great job, and they did nothing wrong, and all they did was ask Raymond what happened. You know, and also, you know, a lot of these officers, their careers were built on this case. A lot of them got to retire and move to Florida with pensions. Mike Sheehan, you know, went on to be on Fox 5. He went on to be on Channel 11. He went on to be in several movies. Linda Fairstein became a novelist. She wrote several fiction books, and she's living a great life. But they'll all sit here and say that they did nothing wrong, you know, and that is the problem.
I just add that that's really not uncommon in our cases, as I mentioned this morning.
Raymond, tell us more about when they got you to specifically confess what you had done. How did they go about that, and what did you say to them that landed you in jail?
Well, what happened was basically, it was me telling the story of what I saw, you know, not me being involved. And this is after I'm broken down, and I'm just telling him what he wants to hear, and he's feeding me what he thought was facts. And so, you know, we formulated the story of, you know, it was Kevin Richardson, Antron McCray, and Steve Lopez. The brick was used. Kevin raped her, and he said, "Well, what did you do?" And I said, "Well, I saw what happened. I had some distance away, and I was watching what was going on." And he told me, he said, "Raymond, that's not believable. You have to be more in it. You have to be right there. In order to be believable, people, you can't just say I was watching it from the trees, behind the trees. People are not going to believe it. You got to be right there at the scene. He says, you got to place yourself. Like, what did you do? And I said, well, I was right there. I saw it. He said, no, you got to be in it. And I said, okay, but I grabbed the woman's breast. And he said, okay. And that's what he wrote down, you know. And then like Liz said earlier, you know, when you see these videotape confessions, you don't see all of this that took place before. All you see is the finished product. And so what happens is that he writes it all down. I'm sitting there crying, and he says, look, don't worry about it. Everything's going to be okay. But I need you to do one more thing for me. And I said, well, what do you need? And he says, I need you to, you're going to go to another precinct. You're going to tell the officer the same story you told me, right? And you're going to do a videotape statement. And don't worry about it. Everything will be okay. And so that's why in those videotape statements, you see us sitting there nonchalant telling the story. Because now we're just it's rehearsed. Now we just gotta sell it. You know, we just gotta sell it. And you know, our parents don't really know what's going on. You know, my father tried to intervene and they told him no. You know, he said, mind you, you know, you gotta stay out of this. Is a serious matter. You know, you can lose your job. And so that's why when you look at those tapes, you just see the kids sitting there, rocking in the chair.
Raymond, did he tell you you're gonna go home? Did he say it'll be all right, you're gonna go home, or did he just say it'll be all right?
Well, no, that was me going home was reiterated several times. You know, I can help you go home. You know, you're a good kid. I want you to go home. I know you didn't do these things. I need your help to go home. You know, that was reiterated several times, and that also becomes a violation of the law. You know, when he's making me like he's offering me a deal. You know, he's offering me a deal. He's saying if I help him, he's going to help me to go home.
I want to know, obviously you were interrogated in different rooms than the other four. Did they try to use each other against each other to in other words to say he already confessed, so if you just back up his story, then we'll let you go, because he, in other words, did they use you against each other?
You know, what they do is like not Arroyo, not the first police officers, Hardigan. You know, they played the good cop, bad cop on me. And so when Hardigan comes in, he's the one that's trying to tell me, like, look, these guys are in the other precincts, and they're saying you did it. And so he's basically telling me, like, look, you gotta give me a story to beat them to the punch. If not, you're going to jail. And that was the tactic that was used also.
I have a question. Did the people who questioned them, were they all Caucasian, or some of them were Hispanic, African American? What were they?
Well, they were all Caucasian, and the lead detective was Arroyo. He was Hispanic. The one who did all the questioning, he was Hispanic.
Yes. Does it torment you to this day that you gave other names and gave the acts of others who were innocent and told on them, in other words? Does that torment you?
You know, it doesn't torment me because it was the circumstances of what happened. I didn't know these guys, you know, I was scared, I was trying to go home. And so if he would have gave me 100 names, I would have placed 100 people at the crime scene. Now for me, you know, I thought maybe once the investigation is conducted, they will find out that we were lying, you know, and they did find out, but they didn't, that story to them just sounded too good and they didn't want to let it go. And also the reason why the five of us never had any animosity towards each other behind that was because we all understood that we all went through it, except for Yusuf. But the four of us went through the same thing.
So you went to trial, you got convicted, you went upstate, as they say, and how did you finally get released?
Well, what happened was I went upstate. And in that process, I had to attend sex offender classes. I was able to get my GED. I was able to get an associate's degree, and I was up for parole, and I got denied parole because I wouldn't admit the rape of the jogger. And so I was released on what's called the conditional release date, a CR date, because I earned the good time, so I had to serve 2/3 of my sentence. And I did that, and that's how I was released. And so when I came back, you know, you think, you know, as a 14-year-old kid going to prison, you can't see that far. You know, it looks like it's forever. But you finally get to that point where you are released, and you think, all right, maybe I can come home and I can try to put my life back together. You think, you know, I'm gonna get a job and everything's gonna be fine. And then you gotta register with parole. You know, you have a 7 o'clock curfew. You have to register as a sex offender. And then they want you to attend the sex offender classes that go on every week. So now you gotta sit in a group with about maybe, you know, 10 other guys. And they're telling crimes of what they really did. And you're sitting there saying, I didn't do anything, you know. And then reality sets in. You know, I couldn't get a job. Nobody wanted to hire me. You know, if I filled out 10 applications, I got 9 denials. And if I got to that one person, they said, what you went to jail for? And I said, rape. I'm not getting hired. And if that one person said, you know what, okay, you got a rape charge, but I'm gonna give you a chance. What was your case about? You know, what happened? And I said, the Central Park jogging case. There it is. There is no job for me. And so for me, that became me hitting rock bottom. I went back to prison. What happened was that I started selling drugs because I felt that I had no other alternative. I didn't get work release. I never got to a halfway house. I never got to a transitional program. You know, they put me back out in society and said, all right, go function. And I couldn't. I didn't have the tools. The only thing I had was an associate's degree. But when you have a rape charge, that associate's degree doesn't mean anything. You know, and I went back to jail. And this time I was guilty. So I took a plea bargain. And I was in my 4th year when Mateus Reyes came forward, you know, who was the sole perpetrator of this case.
Have you ever been reimbursed for the time? Were you ever reimbursed for the time that you served? I think some prisoners are being reimbursed for their time in prison,
Well,
especially if they're wrongly convicted.
yeah.
That would be wrongly convicted.
Well, let me give you a little bit of background on that. So, you know, Mateus Reyes was known as the Eastside Slasher. He was known as the Eastside Rapist. And like I stated earlier, he had committed a rape on April 17th that he never got charged with. He committed an April 19th rape, which is the Central Park jogger. And he went on to commit several other rapes. And what led to his being apprehended was that he raped a pregnant woman and killed her. And so he was wanted for murder. And Mike Machine, who was the same detective that was in our case, was in his case. And so he's finally caught, and he's caught not because of the police department. He's caught because he entered into a building and he raped this woman. And as he's going towards his MO, to bound and gag her, she gets away. And she runs downstairs and she tells the doorman. And the doorman and the construction workers are the one who apprehends him, not the police. And so what happens is that now he's on Rikers Island, and he's in the same housing unit as Corey Wise, who's involved in his case, and they get into a scuffle over the TV, and so nothing happens. It's really here and there, and 13 years later, he bumps into Corey in Auburn Correctional Facility, and he sees Corey, and he says, "Wow, that's the guy that's locked up for the Central Park job case." And they say, "Yeah." And he goes up to Corey, and he says, "Hey, Corey, I know you don't remember me, but we had a fight over the TV, and I just want to apologize." And Corey says, "Look, no need to apologize. That was 13 years ago. Neither here or there. It doesn't free either one of us. Forget about it." And they start talking. And he tells Corey, "I found God, since I've been, in prison. I go regularly." And Corey says, "You know what? That's awesome. Keep doing what you're doing, and you'll be all right." And through that conversation, he felt, he felt so relaxed with Corey that he felt he had to do the right thing. And so what he did was he went to the chaplain. He told the chaplain, "Hey, somebody's here because of a crime that I committed." And so it goes up the ladder all the way to Albany. and it gets to the DA's office, and the DA, they do a year-long investigation. And they go in and interview him, and he knows all the facts. You know, he knows where he found her at, he describes the location, he describes what she had on, he tells you what he did to her, how he took her headset and her keys, which all that stuff was missing. And they still didn't believe him. They still didn't believe him, so they tested DNA evidence that they had, and it was a match, right? And so, okay, so they said, all right, so we know he did it. So now they try to find a connection between him and us. They couldn't find the connection. And so they said, you know, what makes him credible? You know, what makes him credible? Why do we have to believe this guy that he acted alone, even though that was his MO? And he goes on to solve 4 unsolved cases. And they go back and reinvestigate those, and they find out that he did it. And so, you know, at this point, I'm in my 4th year, and I call my dad, and he tells me, you know, they found Reyes. They found the guy who finally committed the case. And by this point, I was so institutionalized that I still didn't believe it. And I felt that they would just make him the 6th man, and they would sweep this under the rug, and I would go to, you know, I would spend the rest of my life as Raymond Santana, convicted of raping Central Park jogger. And it wasn't until 2002 that our convictions were vacated, you know, after a year-long investigation by the district attorney's office. And the reason why we haven't received compensation is because we have been in a 10-year litigation battle with the city. And so what happens is that first the city said that we were still guilty. They said that either we went first or Reyes went first, which is theories that you hear from a lot of prosecutors now when it comes to forced confessions. You know, how come the DNA evidence doesn't match? In the Inglewood case, you know, their prosecutor gave them the theory of that they went first and they left her for dead, and a serial rapist came along and he finished the job, which is the same theory they use for us. And then that has changed several times. So now their theory is, well, you know, we're not here to prove whether the Central Park Five are innocent or guilty. We're just saying that the police did nothing wrong, and they followed protocol and did a great job. And so this is the reason why we haven't been compensated for all those years that we lost, because nobody wants to admit that they're wrong.
So you've never officially been exonerated?
No, we have been exonerated. All charges dropped. Our names are taken off of register lists. Our names are, you can't find our ID numbers in the inmate lookup. It's like it doesn't exist. You know, like this case never happened. And so we have been fully exonerated. All charges are gone. And you would think that even though we've been exonerated, well, that's it. Like there's no more to go.
That's what I'm confused about.
But the city's basically saying the police did nothing wrong. And so we're basically going through litigation with them to prove that they did do something.
Yeah, I just feel compelled to explain quickly that it's very confusing. Exoneration does not automatically get you compensated. It doesn't even automatically expunge your record. So even getting your record expunged is a separate legal proceeding. Then you are almost definitely not going to be successful in any kind of a lawsuit for your time of wrongful imprisonment unless you can prove that there was misconduct. If you are deemed to have sort of participated in your wrongful conviction in any way, and this has been interpreted by many states to mean that, you know, if you falsely confessed, you cannot qualify for the compensation in that state. Certainly think the Central Park Five have a good misconduct case, but it's, you know, not that cut and dried. And you know, you always sort of see the headlines of wrongfully, you know, imprisoned person wins millions, but the reality is this is a minority of people that, you know, have that outcome.
Yes, I have a question, actually two. One, are you still connected with those other 4 guys?
Yeah.
And my other question is, did the film do anything for you?
All right, for your first question, yes, I still speak to Antron McCrae daily. Matter of fact, he's here now. He just came from Georgia, and he's at his family's house. I'm supposed to see him later on. before he goes back. And then me and Yusuf, we do these type of engagements all the time. Thanks to Liz and Kevin also, and Corey also. So we all stay connected. And your second question was?
Had to do with the film.
Oh, well, you know, the film is a blessing in disguise. We met Sarah Burns in 2003. She was an intern in our lawyer's office, and she was writing a thesis paper. I think might get it kind of messed up, but she was writing a paper, and so we stood in touch. And she was on her way to law school, and in her reinvestigating this case and digging up all these facts and reading all these transcripts, you know, she became obsessed. She couldn't let the case go. You know, she saw so much wrongdoing that she said something has to be done. And so she volunteered to write a book. And so she came to us about 4 years later. She said, hey, I want to do something. You know, I want to write a book. You know, can you guys, you know, participate and tell your story? And at first the guys were hesitant because the media had did us so wrong, you know, in dissecting our lives and making us look so horrible that we was afraid that this was going to be the same outcome. But then we thought about it, and I said, look, this is the perfect opportunity because our voices were silenced for so many years. You know, we did interviews here and there, but not of this magnitude. You know, it wasn't this big. And so I said, this has to be done. And also, our lawyers didn't want us to tell too much of the story because of the litigation. But we felt that, you know, it had to be told. You know, this was like, this is it, I'm all in. You're playing poker, you gotta just, this is it, this is how it's gonna go out. And that's how we felt. We felt that we had to gamble and put the whole story on the line. And so, in the process of her writing the book, I didn't know her father was Ken Burns. I had no idea. You know, it wasn't until, you know, he read a couple of chapters of the book and he was like, wow, this is a great film. And so they proposed it a couple of years later. And I was like, who's Ken Burns? And they're like, you don't know Ken? I'm like, no, I don't know Ken Burns. And so they gave me a couple of movies. I watched The 10th Inning and I watched the Jack Johnson story. And I said, well, you know what? You got to take a chance. You know, I know, you know, we're not too kind of the media, but this is our opportunity to make things right, let everybody hear our voice. And so we did the film, and the film was great. You know, when we first saw it, it was the four of us, and we was just so speechless. I remember Corey was like, can we put it out right now? And they was like, no, not yet. You know, we got to tweak a couple of things, and then it's ready to go. And then they went to Cannes, and they went to Telluride, and I went. The first trip I went with them was to Toronto, and this was my first time sitting in the crowd of 200, 300 people. And the movie comes on, everybody's quiet, silent, nobody moves. And afterwards, we got a standing ovation, and I was speechless. I couldn't talk. But the response was just so overwhelming. It was great. And the film has done a bunch of things for us. It gave us a voice back. It gave us back some dignity. It gave us back our humanity. But also became part of our healing process. You know, every time we go to a screening, and you have 300 people sitting there, and they want to hug you, they want to talk to you, and they want to become your friend on Facebook. All that stuff heals. Yeah, all that stuff heals. You know, because we felt that so many people were against us back then, that now the table was turning, and people started to embrace us. And since then, I have did over maybe 15 film festivals, numerous screenings. I just came back from Maine, and we're going up to New Hampshire this weekend, and next weekend we're going to Boston. Yeah, you're coming with us. That's my daughter in the back.
Hello.
And so the film did so much for us.
So how are you making a living? How are you, what do you do currently to support yourself and your family?
I work for $11.99 at CIU with the Pension and Benefits Fund. That's one of my jobs, and then I have this one here where we go, we speak. You know, because back in 1989, you know, we were 14, 15-year-olds, 16-year-old kids, and nobody wanted to invest in us. And so the four of us, or the five of us, came together and said, this is how we give back, we invest back. And so we do a lot of speaking, you know, at colleges, at high school, with seniors, and we try to tell them to use us as an example.
Did you receive any financial benefit from the film?
No, that was strictly done, you know, on a leap and a prayer. You know, that our story would get out and it would be told, you know, the truth. You know, we had did interviews before, and by the time it gets to you guys, it's chopped up, and it becomes more of a, do you believe it? Do you don't believe it? And so we always wanted just the facts to be told, and Ken Burns did that. He just told the facts.
Well, any other questions? I don't want anyone to, you know, stay past time if they were planning on leaving.
How is your family dealing with you being back after so many years, and you being there, you were 14, and some of them really don't know you at all now, and to deal with, how is that?
You know, that was in the beginning it was very rough, because I came from a big family, and you know, 5 uncles on one side, 3 uncles on another, and they all thought I was guilty. And so I didn't have I didn't have no support. You know, the only person I had was my dad. My mom's sick, you know, she passed away while I was in prison. And so all I had was my dad and my sister. That was it. And so, you know, things were very hard for my dad. He got ridiculed a lot at work. You know, he developed a drinking problem because, you know, as a father, not being able to, you know, our goal as parents is to provide, protect, you know, make sure our kid is always great. And you always prepare for that one situation where you're going to rise as a parent and do that job that you've been destined to do as a parent, to make sure nothing happens to your kid. And he failed that. Now, it wasn't his fault, but he felt like he failed that. That was that ultimate, you know, that point. And so he developed a drinking problem. And since then, he has recovered. You know, he's been great. You know, he's retiring from his job after 44 years on the job. And he's doing fine. He just went through deposition recently. But you know, as a whole, you know, time always heals wounds. And so, you know, what happened is I wound up going to a film festival in LA, and a lot of my uncles and aunts came up with my cousins to see the film. And you know, there was apologies and hugs exchanged. And you don't, you know, I guess for me, you know, you got to give people a chance. You know, you have to give people a chance to acknowledge their wrong, acknowledge their mistakes, and to say I'm sorry, you know, and then from there you move on. You know, and that's what happened with my family.
Tell us a little more, Raymond, about what it was like in jail for you, in prison. Did you have a prison mate? What were your days like?
You know, for me they were very long. You know, you wake up 7 in the morning and there's breakfast and then there's school because I was so young. And then there's a trade, you know, in the afternoon, or there's a GED program. You know, they had these, before the GED, they had these exams that you had to pass to move to like the next level. So they were studying for that, and then there was recreation and stuff like that. But the days just always seemed long. You know, there were times where I was sleeping. You dream that I'm home, and then wake up and I'm still in prison. You know, and you know, on initial, when you first come into prison, they give you these reports. They give you this paperwork, and this paperwork basically tells you what your sentence is, what your charges are, when is your first parole appearance, when is your, it breaks down your whole, it's like a sentencing, like a sentence stats, some sort of a stat with your sentencing. And I remember this was 1990, and I didn't go to parole board until 1994, and I felt like that was so long from now. I felt like it was forever. And so you had to deal with that, you know. But then, you know, it comes, that day comes, and you know, you hope you're prepared to come back out in society and do the right thing. So it was definitely.
Are the other fellows who were involved, are they doing what you were doing? Are they going around the country showing the film How invested are they? And I imagine that some of them are doing better than others just based upon their personalities, how they reacted to this injustice. Would you describe kind of what each of these other guys are doing?
Yeah, everybody's involved. They go around, they talk, they do screenings, they talk to high school kids, do basically the same stuff I'm doing. Kevin has a job, he works for a hospital. Yusuf also works for a hospital, he works for wireless communications. Corey, he's on disability. And then Antron, he lives in Georgia. Antron's story is different from ours because he felt the only way for him to try to be productive and, try to move forward in life was to leave New York. And he went to Georgia, he was in Maryland, he went to Georgia, and he went on to get married, and he has about 6 kids. And so he really started to live like this sheltered life. Nobody knew about him. He changed his last name, so that he can try to get ahead. And, for a long time, he was very bitter. He didn't even want to do the movie. He didn't want to be involved because he didn't want to jeopardize what he was trying to build, but he took a chance. And so, he's here now because he has to do depositions next week. Yeah. And Yusuf has 5 kids, and Kevin and Corey don't have any yet.
You talked about your family and going through the healing process, and your uncle saying they were sorry for it. Has anyone from the police or the media or the city administration at that time, and I haven't seen the film, remember Ed Koch and the way he spoke about you? Has anybody ever come and said they were sorry?
No, nobody has. The police department is deep in litigation, so they're still saying we're guilty. Same thing with district attorney's office. Robert Morgendorf never apologized, but he just said he had to do the right thing, and the right thing was to vacate the convictions. But other than that, most of the apologies come from people, who have seen the film, who have sat in places like this and have these great discussions, because people were told a lot, and people believed it back in 1989. And so even that, we don't fault people for that. We understand you guys are told a lot, and so most of our apologies come from the public, but that's awesome. We accept those, we take them, yeah.
Do you ever imagine what your life might have been like had none of this happened, or do you not even go there?
I don't, because this case is 24 years old. We go into some of these schools and there's kids who ain't even born, and they just finding about the Central Park 5. And so it's been so long and so deep in the history that I don't, imagine what I could have been. I just imagine what I am. I think about what I am now. I get questions sometimes. Do you think it was all for God's? God has a type of purpose. And I always say, well, wow, he wanted to give me purpose. He had to do it this way. He could have did it a whole different way. You're God. Come on now, let's but we accept it. We accept it. We're given a duty and we're trying to fulfill it. And that's to give the message to the kids, let them know that this is use us as an example of what not to get caught into. Especially now with Stop with Fritz and Kamani Gray and Trayvon Martin, countless others. And like Liz says, this just doesn't happen here. It's happening all across the U.S.
How did you and your wife meet?
Oh, well, I'm not married yet.
Oh.
I wonder, I'm sorry, I see people putting on their coats and, we are out of time and I want to respect people that need to leave. So why don't we go ahead and wrap up if that's okay with you, Raymond? And then of course, individually we can, we're a small group. Please feel free to approach us, if you want to stay and ask other questions, just approach us personally.